Good evening, everyone. Why don't we come on in and let's get our evening started? Wow, that was effective. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see you here, and it is absolutely wonderful for me to be back in my second home. My name is Nick Sensley, and I am the former chief of police of the town of Truckee, and it has been my pleasure to serve in the community, and it's my pleasure to remain attached to the community. So as I come and I see those who I know and love, and I see the new faces of those whom I have not had a chance to meet, I want to say to all of you, welcome on behalf of my partner and colleague, Jessica Munoz from Hool Na Pua, and our partners with Awaken and others who have been here. And mostly we want to give thanks to Sierra Bible Church for hosting this gathering. And just, it's a real pleasure to be here among you again. I'm going to jump right into talking about our reason for gathering here tonight. How many of you, before being here tonight, are aware of this issue of human trafficking? Just by show of hands. So as I scan the room and talk about human trafficking or trafficking in persons or modern day slavery, I'm not really bringing you a new topic. I mean, I can step through the processes of defining human trafficking, and this is my own definition. After 21 years of combating this issue around the world, I feel like I can take latitude in throwing up my own definitions instead of using those that are out there in the public space. But it is modern day or contemporary slavery, which many of us would prefer to call it instead of human trafficking. Because sometimes it feels like human trafficking is a safe or politically correct terminology to use for something that is far more egregious. And ultimately, it is an act of abuse and of brutality. And I like to refer to it as an abuse of human dignity. Because if you put it in the context of simply referring to it along the lines of human rights, we tend to think about the law and the legal context and society and issues of social right and wrong. But when we talk about it in the context of human dignity, we are forced to be reminded that there is a person or persons behind this atrocity. And we can never allow ourselves to be separated from that reality that this being, this wonderful being, male, female, young, old, from a full spectrum of society, from the impoverished to those who are in circumstances of social wealth and status, there are no victims who are left outside of the reach of this horrendous crime. It is a crime against a person. It is an abuse. It is a violation. It is a disregard for human dignity. It is a disregard for the persons who are victimized by this crime. So tonight, as we talk on a variety of topics, and me being given the privilege of opening up this time together with you, I really want that to be at the core of your concern about this problem. Is that this being who I believe to be a created being by a loving God, is being stripped intentionally of a God-given right to dignity, to a life of peace, a life of love, a life of concern among fellow beings. And this atrocity strips and takes all of that away. All to meet the needs of a commercial or personal interest of another, all to meet the desires and the needs of greed, of power, of control, of many multifaceted reasons that come behind this problem. I need you to attach your consciousness to a concern on this level, because it's clear that I'm not going to teach you very much new about the manifestation of this problem. I'm not even going to bother trying to try to give you a lesson on human trafficking. Or maybe I'll just step through a couple of things to make sure that we're on the same page as I try to drive home a very simple point. So let's look at the dynamics of this issue. We know that it's a crime that occurs in a variety of environments. So as if you look at this list, domestic servitude, housekeepers, nannies, home care, in debt bondage, is in a multitude of labor situations where persons are brought over and forced into labor under the presumption that they have to pay back a significant debt, which they're never able to pay, is the whole idea. Custodial work, hotels, schools, public and private buildings, prostitution and various forms of sexualized labor, or as it's known as the sex industry, right? On the oceans in various vessels. I know that out in Hawaii, when working with Jessica and her team out there talking to members of the Coast Guard, one of the things that they used to do in Hawaii was they would get these young girls out on these huge yachts, and they would take them just far enough out into international waters so they weren't concerned by any issues of the state of Hawaii or the U.S. laws that they would be violating. Of course, they were technically violating international laws, but that's another story. Factory, restaurant, agriculture, construction, servile marriage, public begging, and on and on. So let's look at how it works. So when we look at it from sort of the economics of trafficking, as I call it, and the reason why I prefer it that way, because nowadays the traffickers have so dehumanized, right, coming back to our attachment to the human being that is involved in this. The traffickers have so dehumanized those whom they victimize in this problem that they're now referring to them in their casual conversations as my commodity or as a commodity, or in speaking in terms as though they were talking about a product that you can go to a market somewhere and pick up. Not to be disrespectful or crude about it, but in many cases, that is the way it happens in going to markets as a part of this crime. So if we look at the sort of economics of it, and this, you'll see why this is important in the next slide, there are certain market factors that occur. And just as you know from your basic classes in economics, there's a demand, there are enablers to provide what is demanded, creating a supply, and therefore it creates a market, right? So on the demand side, we're talking about sex and labor, plus the enablers. And the enablers, this is where we need to focus here. The enablers occur in our homes. In many cases, begin right in the home with the abuse that goes in the home among the most trusted environment that a human being is expected to live in, right? The safety of our home, the safety of our parenting, the safety of extended family, and even to some degree an expectation of a safety created by our neighbors and within the context of our community. So community and just general vulnerabilities that occur just from social economic problems or a variety of circumstances. I work pretty extensively in Romania now. I have a business, a company there as well. And Romanians and Bulgarians are among the most trafficked people in all of Europe. And to this day, it has become a mission of mine to try to figure out the whys behind that. Because When you look at Romania as a country, they're doing fairly well as a former Soviet republic. And there are certainly countries in their region that are worse off than Romania, whose people are not trafficked as much as the Romanians are. So this whole issues of what are the vulnerability factors? I can name one vulnerability factor. So with the exodus of so many people from certain small regions of the country, they've left the ratio of women to men of 7-1. Little girls, young ladies in an area, 7 females to every 1 male. That's like Predator City, right? I mean, where you don't have daddies, big brothers looking out for the girls to scare away these guys in already social economic conditions of depravity, it creates a problem. So that's an example of what I mean by the type of vulnerability that's created within that. And then right here at home, there's certain vulnerabilities that occur within the context of our own familial environments, and that we are disconnected from our kids, right? With technology and all of the social issues that are going on through the social networks, and sending a text to your mother in the kitchen asking for a glass of water instead of getting up and going to the kitchen to get a glass of some of you are laughing because you're going, I kind of know that to be a reality, right? I mean, and so that creates a certain vulnerability, that separation, that lack of communication, that lack of understanding as to what is going on in the day-to-day life of the persons right within our own homes. Again, a vulnerability factor that yields that supply, that so-called human commodity that the traffickers are very good at noticing, very good at picking up on issues of vulnerability. If these guys would apply the skills that they have in immediately spotting and their capacity to exploit vulnerability, if they applied it to something good, they could be world changers. They really could. I mean, I've talked to these guys by the dozens, talked to victims by the hundreds, if not thousands, at this point in my life. And what is applied in this crime against these lives, it's very powerful. So let's put this into the context of community, because that's what we're talking about. So then, if we take the economics and put it within a structure, it creates an environment for the trafficker. That woman in the middle is an actual convicted trafficker. And it creates a capacity for a network, and it creates an environment for more and more victims to be a part of the problem. Isolating a victim, if we look from how the victims are introduced, if we look at the other side, we look at what we talk about with the vulnerability factors from home, from the community, from the support in the justice system. All of that also adds into putting a victim into the system. Thus, you here today, the reason why we felt it so important to reach out to you and to bring you into the discussion around engaging this problem. You see, it's easy to assume that the work of dealing with this problem rests with law enforcement or it rests with the justice system. Did you know that less than 5% of the information that law enforcement or the justice system uses to solve crimes comes from within the justice system itself and from the system? So if that be the case, less than 5% of the information that law enforcement uses to solve crimes comes from internal resources, computers, the data, the fancy analyzing, all that sort of stuff. The question then is, where does the other 95% come from? Comes from you, comes from the community. Does that make sense? Right? And so if the community, let's put it together then, less than 5% internal, which means not very many crimes being solved, 95% of the information and the capacity to solve the problem, the crime problem, where do we really need to be focusing our attention on dealing with this issue? Within the question then becomes how? And what do we do? How do we engage around this issue? How do we become a resource to problem-solving process? Well, it begins with what you have done today, and what you have done clearly in the past is to make yourself aware that this problem is real, that this problem has the ability and is most likely manifesting itself within your community. Does it happen here in Truckee? Yes. Does it happen in Reno? Yes. Does it happen in just about any city in America? Yes. I had a couple of cases that we were aware of in Truckee, and the way in which they manifested were a bit different and didn't come out as a part of a big issue within the news or in public releases, because these are sensitive issues and they're not necessarily released to the public because of laws and the rights of the victims involved. But it happens. It can happen anywhere. When I travel around the world and across this country, I like to talk to leaders. That's my one of my favorite audiences, is to bring community leaders together so that we can talk. But I often talk to law enforcement leaders in groups and associations. One of the questions that I often pose to them is, how many of you believe that human trafficking is a problem within your community? And usually in the smaller departments or in the more affluent cities, they don't raise their hands. You know, the big city guys, they raise their hand real fast. It's like, I'm there, man, up to my ears. Right? So smaller departments typically don't raise their hands. So I have to break it down for them. I said, so tell me then, let's just work with an example of one aspect of it. How many of you have teenage runaways in your community? And of course, everybody raised their hands, right? No community is immune. Everybody's teenage runaways. And so it's driven home. I said, okay, and how many of you within these communities with these teenage runaways are experiencing cases of repeat runaways? You're seeing the same children running away often. Again, the hands go up. Then I asked another question. How many of you have a process in place to understand what is drawing those children back out? Where are they going? And how are they able to sustain themselves for 2 or 3 days of being away and away from home? Let alone what happens usually, and there's an 85% chance of it, that the third time they run away, they don't come back. The city of Dallas did some research several years ago. And based upon the research and the way that this problem manifested itself within their communities, they found that there is an 85% chance that by the second time a teenage girl runs away, she is going to be sexually exploited. Some guy, usually 5 to 7 years or more older than her, is going to take advantage of her. Sweetheart, your parents are just so messed up. They don't take care of you. Nobody's going to love you the way I do. Here, let me give you a place to sleep tonight. Let's go get something to eat. I'll take real good care of you. And, maybe even the next day he goes, maybe you need to just go home and just see if you can make up with your parents and just make this right. From what he's talked with her about, he already knows that when she gets home, the parents are going to be explosive. Going to be angry. You stayed out overnight. We call the police. And so everything that he's prepped her for is now coming out before her. So who's the greatest person in the world for her? He is. So he goes back. So we know now that by the third time this teenage girl runs away, there's an 85% chance that she's going to be commercially sexually exploited, and she's not going to be returning home very easily. Because, well, okay, you can stay here, if you want, goes the story, goes the line, but you got to pay for it somehow. Well, I don't have a job, and if I get a job, I got to get my parents. Well, there's other ways to make money, and the story goes on, right? And sometimes it doesn't even have to be that complicated. When I was living in Washington, D.C., in Fairfax County, one of the more affluent counties in Virginia, which is the reason why I had to leave, but they were trafficking the girls right out of the high school. They would let them go home at night, and they were trafficking them right out of the school. I see Dana here, her eyes are going like, okay, our school teacher here. They were trafficking right out of school. Didn't bother with keeping them away from home at night. They had appointments set up for them immediately after school and on lunch breaks. Over 40 children right there out of one county school were undergoing this network. And when they caught up with the traffickers, one of the lines that I always use and remind folks of, these guys had rap sheets that were as long as your arm for gang activity and drug trafficking. And these guys are caught pretty cold. And when you get them cold and they know the game is over, they usually talk, right? And when they started talking, say, what happened to the drug game? Drugs are tough, man. I mean, there's a narc on every corner. Trafficking is where the money is. High returns and low risk. I can move these women, these girls, with nobody ever noticing, so they say. High profit, low risk. And I'm ashamed to say that part of the problem is it's still manifesting itself as a high profit, low risk crime. And again, it brings us back to where the solution lies. Within your awareness, your engagement somehow on some level, and there are multiple levels we can talk about, makes all the difference in the world. It begins with education. It begins with asking questions about what's going on in the lives of the children within our communities, being in touch with the programs that are happening and where children are hanging out, being concerned about the enforcement response to this problem. Wherever you are, the police department, the prosecutors, the judges are all accountable to your concern. They are all accountable to your concern, but if your concerns are not expressed, then there is no accountability. You need to let everyone know that this is a big problem. How is it manifesting in our community? Are we responding to this runaway problem with a more in-depth look into the problem? Now in Truckee, we have sort of a special situation. We have, at least when I was chief of police, we had nearly 50% of our homes were second homes. And there were a lot of homes that were maybe being rented out short term, and I don't know what the rules are with regard to Airbnb in Truckee, but if it exists, there's all sorts of potential with regard to people coming within the community and bringing it with them. So for instance, it's easy enough to stop down in Sacramento and bring a few girls up into the community, or stop in Reno and rent houses and come into the community. I'm just telling you about how it could manifest itself. Okay? Because we're so used to seeing people in groups. Hey, this is a place where people come to have fun and to enjoy themselves. But what I want to do, just in really simplifying what may seem like an overwhelming process, my call to you is simply don't shut yourself down when you have suspicions about what you see. If you see some young ladies, young boys, that are under what appears to be non-parental type control of the persons that they're with, be concerned. And you would be amazed at if in passing or if bumping into someone in a restroom, the simple question is of, how are you doing? Or, you doing okay? You doing all right? It's a powerful question. It goes a long way in just having a person unlock. I can't tell you how many victims that I have talked to who always began their sentence with, if only they had. If the policeman had only asked me, when's the last time you had something to eat? If the policeman had asked me, when's the last time you had a good night's rest? If only the social workers had really given me a sense of peace and space with telling my story. The if only someone had scenario is the challenge that I ultimately bring before you. You are aware of this problem. And with awareness comes accountability. And with awareness comes a social responsibility that says, I will not stand by and pretend that this problem does not exist around me. It says, I'm going to be concerned about what I see. I'm going to be concerned that this is an issue which our community pays attention to. I'm going to be engaged where I can if there are volunteer opportunities, if there are support opportunities. They can go a long way. I'm always grateful for my dear sister and friend, Bobby Johansson, who really was, I would say, quite the instigator for me even being here today to speak with you about this issue, because Bobby I was at a space in my career around this issue where I was kind of hiding from it for a while. I've been doing this for over 21 years around the world, and while I was up here as chief of police, I thought, I'm just kind of tuck away. I'm going to work on some other things. Sure enough, Bobby shows up in the office, as scared as ever to talk to the chief of police, but just held on to her courage and said, I need to talk to you about this problem, which I know you have experience and expertise on, and we want to get engaged on it in our community, thus leading me to ultimately meet her daughter, Jessica Munoz, who is the founder and president of Hool Na Pua out of Hawaii, who I want to welcome to the stage and have her come up and introduce herself to you and tell you more about this work. Thank you for being here, everyone.
Thanks, Nick. Can you guys hear me okay? Good. Well, good evening. I'm so excited to see so many people here. Came out on a Monday. I know Mondays are always hard with work, and so I really appreciate it. This is, as Nick said, probably one of the most important things you could be doing tonight, getting educated on this issue. And so I'm excited just to spend the next few minutes talking with you a little bit about, in a little bit more detail, about what these traffickers look like, some of the healthcare responses to this. My day job is I'm actually a nurse practitioner, and I've been in the ER for a very long time. And 10 years ago, for those of you who weren't at church yesterday, I started seeing these kids come into the emergency rooms, and we weren't screening, identifying, or recognizing them as victims of exploitation. And all of my background is in pediatric trauma, and so I have worked with sex assault, domestic violence, child abuse, sexual abuse, and yet no one had ever told me that American children were, one, bought and sold in the United States, but that also it was my job as a healthcare professional to be recognizing and seeing this firsthand. And so as I'm in the emergency room, recognizing this issue, I'm wanting to make a phone call and go, okay, who am I supposed to talk to? Who are we supposed to call? And I'm thinking, there's got to be somebody to call. Yeah, there is nobody to call. And at the time when we would call law enforcement, the response was often, oh yeah, we know her. No, there's nothing you can do. And just, it was very dismissive. And so I thought, okay, well, we need to clearly educate more people, one, on recognizing, but also, like, what is the response to this and who's supposed to be involved? And so about 9 years ago, I started working with the Hawaii Coalition Against Human Trafficking, which essentially was maybe 10 people that would show up. And all they wanted to talk about was labor trafficking. And I'm like, hey, we have this huge issue of our local kids being bought and sold. And they're like, oh no, that doesn't happen here. Okay, I thought this was the Hawaii Coalition Against Human Trafficking. So we did a lot of work with this entity, which now has 50 plus people from all layers of law enforcement, both state, federal, city. We have service providers. And so it's grown into this very incredible multidisciplinary team, but it took us a long time to get there. And Nick was a big part in transforming that response, because those 10 people then multiplied, and so the response became much stronger. So for the sake of time, I am going to start by I talk mostly about children, because my focus is 100% on children who are being exploited. And so when you think about the different ways that kids are actually bought and sold, it can be through prostitution, escort services, survival sex, what people call survival sex, pornography, sex tourism. So Hawaii is actually a sex tourism destination, just like Las Vegas would be considered. We have girls who work in massage parlors, who work in strip clubs, and these girls most of the time are under 18 with fake IDs. So I'm really into language and how we talk about this issue. I'm really tired of hearing these women, these young women, especially when we're talking about children. And so I think it's important, especially in light of, I'm sure you've all watched the news and seen the Epstein case, and it's been referenced oftentimes as these young women, these child prostitutes, these, oh, he was having sex with a minor. No, that's rape. There's no such thing as a child prostitute. There's no such thing as an underage woman. It's a child. They're under 18. You don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. It is against the law for these kids to be involved in this industry. So when you look at, and Nick touched on this, when you look at kind of the ecosystem that exists, you know, it's not that, oh, we just have all these victims, right? Or that we have all these prostituted persons, but you have a pimp, you have a buyer, and you have the supply, or the individual that's being bought and sold. We wouldn't have this problem if we didn't have a buyer, right? Right? So we partnered with Arizona State University last year. They came to Hawaii. They have the only Office of Sex Trafficking Research in the country. And we said, okay, let's do some research on what's happening in Hawaii around our buyer market. So this was right before there was a website called Backpage went down. We posted an ad of a young girl for, at first, we were just going to leave it up for 24 hours. So at the time, there was about 58 ads of a similar type of ads up on Backpage. Within the first 4.5 minutes, we had 10 unique individuals calling and wanting to buy. Within 24 hours, we had 427 unique buyers. When they've done this in Phoenix, LA, and Atlanta, they get maybe 24 to 30 people in 24 hours. So we have a raging sex market in the state of Hawaii, of which that when we left the ad up for over 2 weeks, when you distill down the statistics, it shows that 1 in 11 men are looking to buy sex in the state of Hawaii. And what was crazy about it is that 70% of those numbers were 808 buyers. So when in Hawaii, I grew up here in Truckee, and when I moved to Hawaii, I thought, okay, this feels very similar, small town mentality. And of course, the first thing was, oh, that's the tourists that come and buy. It's only the tourists. It's a tourist problem. It's not. It's not. And I guarantee you, if you replicate this study in other places, because they've done it all over, and you did it in a small town like this, see the same thing. We posted the same ad in Hilo. So Hilo is a really rural community on the Big Island. And even though the population is less, statistically, it was the same. So it was eye-opening for us. And we were able to get this information on the front page of the Sunday morning paper, the largest read news in the state. People were in uproar and couldn't believe it. So when we think about these pimps, why do you think they do this? You know, people will say, oh, it's just for the money. Yeah, the money's part of it. Power and control. Most kids who are under the age of 24 are controlled by a pimp at some point. They can make up to $10,000 a week per individual. Oftentimes, these guys can have 10, 15 girls in their stable. I mean, that's a pretty good job. You make a lot of money. You don't pay taxes on it most of the time. So if you look up on the screen, when you look to the right, those are actual convicted pimps. You look to the left, and I think most of us would recognize those individuals, right? If you guys don't know, you need to read more. That's Snoop Dogg. How about that gentleman down there on the bottom, on the left? He is no longer alive. However, there are many more of him out there, but he is by far probably the worst pimp that's ever existed in the history of this world. You can see on the bottom right, R. Kelly, the rapper, very much involved in the sex trafficking trade and industry. So when we think, oh, it's just, the guy who wears the big chain and drives the fancy cars with the spinning wheels, it's not. And it's not just men who pimp. It's also females. And it's not just older people. In Hawaii, we have boys that help recruit and actually start the pimping process right off our school campuses. It's very prevalent and very common. So the typical profile of a buyer, it's disproportionately white, middle, upper class men. They come from a variety of backgrounds. So there was a big study done out of the University of Chicago, which looked at what these buyers look like. And you will see that they are high-powered executives, pastors, teachers, lawyers, doctors. There's a pediatrician in Hawaii who's known for his involvement in this. Still free, still practicing as a pediatrician. 54% of them are oftentimes married, higher than average education, and come from a variety of backgrounds. So we're going to watch this video because one of the things that I think it's important to understand, because we say, okay, so people are buying, but why are they buying? Most of the time, they're buying because it's driven by this addiction to pornography. Pornography is the driver for trafficking. You don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to go out and buy somebody to have sex with. That visualization becomes actualization. So in our in-school education prevention program, we take the risk and we talk to kids about pornography and the addiction. So I want to show you this short media clip.
This is Anna. Wait, don't click to someone else yet because Anna's stuck here on your computer screen. And while you can walk away, her image is stuck on the internet. See, your fantasy is Anna's nightmare. There's a good chance recruiters lured her with flattery. Perhaps they baited her with cash. Maybe they even tranquilized her with date rape drugs. And if Anna's like many others, she stays sedated with alcohol, weed, or coke to numb the pain. Chances are she faces STDs and HIV because she's denied access to protection. We don't know what she's been through because we only see Anna smiling. And they keep showing Anna smiling so that you'll keep watching. See, pornography is integral to human trafficking and prostitution. In 9 countries, almost half, 49%, said that pornography was made of them while they were in prostitution. This generation fights sex trafficking more than anyone ever has, and more than anyone ever has, this generation consumes porn. Fighting human trafficking and then watching porn is like protesting a corrupt politician and then donating to his campaign. You browse privately, going from Anna to Zoe and back to Anna. Watch your favorite fantasy and then walk away. But Anna's still there. She's stuck there, stuck in this life because you click. Each click, each link, each URL visit and play button, this is the currency of porn. This is the price of Anna's life. The $100 billion pornography industry is fueling the appetite for children as well. Teenage girls now make up the biggest slice of viewable porn, which by definition is considered trafficking. The demand for porn fuels the trafficking industry, and you can take away that demand. You can cut the cord on this machine. You can bankrupt the system. You can empty the pimp's pockets. You can free Anna by simply refusing to click.
I think it's so interesting, some of the responses we get from the kids after showing this video. But I think they get a much better idea that it's not just a click, that there is a human being behind that image, and then that person is being victimized. Let's see. Okay, so when you look at this list, I'm not going to read through all of it, so just scan through it. When you read this list, who do you think is at risk for this to happen to them? Anyone? I've worked with kids who literally grew up in Section 8 housing, to kids who go to the most prestigious private school west of the Rockies, which happens to be located in Honolulu, called Punahou, which costs $30,000 a year to send your child to. It knows no boundaries. Any youth, kids from any background, kids who have a high risk or a history of abuse and violence, who are houseless, who run away, as Nick mentioned. So I think it's important to understand that just because you come from a certain background, that you think, oh, I've set up all those protective factors. All it takes is some guy gets into their life, says, wow, you look so pretty on your Instagram photo. You should be a model. Hey, I want to take some pictures of you. And it can go downhill so fast. So I want to show you this video. It was actually made in Michigan. But the message of this video is one that I believe transcends wherever you live. And it really does paint the story of this issue we have around kids going missing and how that is directly tied into exploitation.
You just take a seat.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming in. I'm Mary, by the way.
I'm Mary. Tonight.
Tonight, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Don't mind the giant microphone above your head.
I'll try not to.
There are 3 photos in front of you. If you could just pick one, it doesn't really matter which one it is, and show that one to us.
All right.
Could you describe her to us?
She looks youthful.
I feel like this is one of those situations where if I say he's 23, then he's actually going to be 16.
Hispanic, maybe not full, but part. Similar to me, actually.
Well, I mean, she's young, so probably has a lot of things to look forward to.
I would describe him as friendly.
She looks, I don't know, happy. She doesn't look shy, but confident.
Anything she puts her mind to, she could achieve.
We actually have his story, if you could read that out loud to us.
Okay, Marcus. I grew up really close to my parents. Adriana. I grew up with my brother and sister.
Amy. I remember watching the Olympics on TV when I was 5 and being totally in awe of the sprinters.
I was the middle child and easily the quietest.
I felt like no one ever saw me or cared.
Dad was too drunk to keep a job, and he never even saw me unless I was in his way.
Mom worked 2 jobs to make sure we had food for every meal, so she was never here to know when he would hit us.
One day when I went to the mall, like I like to do to be out of the house, a man came up to me and told me I was beautiful and asked me on a date.
On our first date, he drove me around in his car and said we could eat whatever I wanted.
Every time we were together, he bought me something new.
Tom really cared about me, and Tom really made me feel special.
I was in love with him.
After only going out for 3 weeks, Tom offered me a way out of my home, asked me to move in with him.
So when he asked me to have sex with him, I did.
He would put his hand over my face until I couldn't breathe.
Tom had friends over pretty regularly, and I could tell that some of his friends were into me.
So I kept my door locked and hoped that no one would bother me.
After a few nights of crashing there, he said that I still owed him for letting me stay at his place.
He said he had a friend who wanted to spend an hour with me.
He told me I might have to do some stuff, but not to worry about it. It's not a big deal.
When I didn't want to, he slapped me and said no one ever cared about me like he did.
But I didn't know what else to do because I needed a place to stay.
His friends forced themselves on me and took turns while he watched.
One by one, they come down to the basement, telling me how pretty I am.
When they're on top of me, I just close my eyes and pretend I'm running.
I'm exhausted and I don't know what to do.
My name is Adriana. I'm 16 years old.
My name is Marcus. I'm 14 years old.
My name is Amy. I'm 12 years old.
I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
That was very different than what I thought.
Especially because, like, being a girl and imagining, like, if that was me, like, that's, I don't even know. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
She deserves to be a kid, just like what she is in this picture.
It being so close to home is something that makes me want to jump out of this chair.
I wouldn't think that Grand Rapids is a place where anything like this would ever happen.
Because you don't want it to happen to anybody, and you really don't want it to happen to people that live where you live.
Thank you for sharing her story with us. I'd like to show you something if you wouldn't mind taking her picture and following me to the gym.
Oh, wow.
I expected something certainly a lot smaller.
Bar graphs and numbers but these are actual people.
I don't know, in like my world, in my bubble or whatever, we don't talk about this. It's not something you think about.
You know, what we see is only on the surface.
I mean, looking at this, sex trafficking doesn't have any discrimination, that's for sure. Ages, genders, can affect anybody.
It hits you right in your heart, your gut, your stomach. It's like, wow. Now it's like I feel like I have this weight of responsibility to see how I can help.
Changes through greater awareness and making people realize that this does happen here and will continue to happen until we decide to make it stop.
In the state of Hawaii, we have about 200 kids that run away every single month. Most of them are multiple runaways, as Nick had talked about earlier. And the sad thing is that very few of them are actually recovered. So we have a significant runaway problem in our state. So there's different pathways that kids can end up exploited. We've talked about the pimps and the person outside of the family nucleus, but we actually work with a lot of kids who are first trafficked and exploited by their families, oftentimes for drug money, for rent money. And so, we face a significant challenge when it's family, especially when our girls ever want to consider testifying against the trafficker, the pimp who was outside the home. One of the first things they'll say to us is, well, how can I testify against him when my first pimp and trafficker was my dad? So Nick mentioned a little bit about this, the fact that, when these kids are out on the street, they're extremely vulnerable. And the high likelihood of them entering into a situation of trafficking or exploitation, surely out of survival, is really, really likely. So when I first started doing this work, it was so interesting to me how in healthcare alone, we did not have any understanding of this issue. And the reality is that almost 90% of victims have some form of an encounter with a healthcare provider while they are being exploited. And it takes almost 9 times of seeing that healthcare provider before they're actually asked about situations of exploitation. The majority of these individuals end up in an emergency room or in urgent care. And so it's really important that not just healthcare professionals, such as the clinical people, but also the people who check people in to be seen, are taught and trained, because oftentimes it's just these subtle hints that will actually show that this individual is in a really tough situation. There was a girl that we worked with who had been going to her pediatrician for about 10 years. She was 16. And that whole time, her father was exploiting her, and it was never, ever picked up. Did her regular checkups, her yearly exams, never picked up. So when another important thing to recognize with the way traffickers work, they're very much into branding or ownership, right? You think of cattle branding, right? That's saying that you own something. So oftentimes these pimps and these traffickers will actually brand their girls or boys. Their girls with, it can be their name, their street name. Up there on the far right corner, that's the cowboy pimp creed. And there was a guy in Texas who tattooed all of his girls with the same thing. And so, of course, when he was apprehended, could find out who his victims were, because they were all tattooed with the same thing. We have pimps that actually now do vaginal branding, especially on the young girls when it's their first time out. And then we're also seeing barcodes and things like that. So, and it's pretty degrading. There we go. What do you guys notice about this picture? It's the same girl, right? Notice the color of her skin. Notice how tired she looks. Same girl, same police department. And you think, okay, that's 1 year. What did we miss? And so that's obvious, right? The trauma that's on the outside is obvious. But what you don't see is what's happening in here, which is even more severe than what's happening to the outside. So when we think about trauma, which is such a, fancy word in this day and age, youth who have chronic trauma truly believe that there aren't adults around them that will protect them. And so this is what makes it very challenging in addressing and working with this population. I'm actually going to skip over that for a second. So there was a study done by Kaiser And it looked at a bunch of adults, and it looked at their adverse child effects or adverse child events. And so it shows that people who suffer significant trauma as children have high risk for multiple public health or chronic health issues, things like increased depression, suicide, alcoholism, addiction, heart disease. And so when they've further gone on and studied this, that chronic inflammation that happens in your body when you've gone through significant stressors actually gets in and changes your neurobiology, and it changes your DNA. And the way that your DNA replicates, it's off and it changes. And so when we think about trafficking and we say, okay, there's all these elements to it, but it's a significant public health concern, especially with how many individuals, because now the conversation is much more elevated, are being found to have been exploited. And so when you have, you can see that picture of the brain up here on the bottom left. The front part of your brain is where all your high-level functioning goes, right? It's where you make decisions. It's how you process things in a linear fashion. And so that red part of your brain is what happens when you go, you've heard of fight and flight, right? That thing that makes you want to run. If you saw a bear, you want to run. Maybe you don't, but I would. So the problem is when you live in a state where that bear is always there and you're chronically stressed and you're chronically scared and you're having all this different abuse coming at you, this part of your brain, that gray part, shuts down. And so you begin processing all of these memories and all of this trauma through the lens of sight, sound, smell. And so it's very challenging when you find one of these individuals and you start wanting to bring them help. That trauma reaction is so severe. The cage around the psyche is so much greater than the cage around the body. And so we get asked a lot, I don't know why this thing, there we go. We get asked, okay, why do these girls stay? Right? If, oh my goodness, they got rescued, we rescued them out, we got them to this safe place, and why do they want to go back? So there's a thing called trauma bonding. And so basically a pimp uses a mix of love and affection along with anger and violence, and he quickly fluctuates between the two states. He might tell one of his girls he loves her, and the next minute slap her across the face. This creates this powerful combination of love and fear, right? Keeps the victim in a state of hypervigilance to the pimp's needs. That bond becomes so strong that they don't have to be physically chained. The pimp's psychological hold is so intense that he's able to control the victim as they're on the street, in a hotel room, at a truck stop, in a house, even if he's not right there. Psychological control is just as powerful as physical control, but it's a lot harder to see. What does this sound like? Domestic violence? So it's very similar. So when people say, okay, why don't they leave? Well, you have a master manipulator who preys on an individual who is searching for love, acceptance, and attachment, who's providing for those basic needs, right? I'm going to give you something to eat. I'm going to put a safe roof over your head. You're brainwashed, restricts their freedom of movement, threatens and invokes fear constantly. And then you have a victim who feels shame and blame and distrust, lacks the resources or a safe place to go. We live on an island, so everybody knows everybody. So they know, oh, I'm going to threaten your cousin, your auntie, your uncle, and they know where these individuals are. They don't just threaten, they know. They're very isolated. They have these emotional attachments to this individual. They might feel obligated. They have a loss of self-value and worth. And so it's hard to understand, right? But when we think about domestic violence, how many times does it take an individual to leave? Do you know? It's a lot. Yeah. 7, 9, 20. It's a lot of times. And that's an adult. When you're talking about a 12 or 13-year-old child whose brain is not fully formed and developed, it's almost impossible for them to do this on their own. So what's so important around psychological trauma is that disempowerment and disconnection from others. In order to adjust that, in order to change that, you have to create new connections. And so when we're talking about community and where community comes into play, this is why having strong case management, having strong mentors, having strong individuals that create these healthy relationships are so important. Because in order to break that bond with that trafficker or that perpetrator, you have to have something healthy to bond with instead. And that takes time. It takes time to build that trust. So what do these kids need? You guys all come from a variety of backgrounds, and in a minute you're going to hear from this amazing group of individuals who are doing this work right here locally. But you can see there is a lot of need. And not one agency, not one case manager can do all this. It takes the community coming around and creating what we call the safety net needed to protect these kids. We can't emphasize enough how you have to get involved in this fight. We have to fight on behalf of these kids. This is who it takes when we talk about a multidisciplinary team. Again, it's not just law enforcement. It's not just the case manager. It's all of these. And I think the one that's even missed up there is the teacher in the school system. You have to address this issue from multiple facets. It can't just be dealing with providing the day-to-day. We have to prevent it. We have to educate. We have to get kids and women and men out of this. But we also have to look at the long term. How do you create the continuum of care that's needed for these kids? And a big piece of what we're doing in Hawaii is we're building a residential treatment center for underage girls who've been exploited. And it will be an option for kids from anywhere across the country. You have to be female, between the ages of 11 and 18. And so we're building a 32-bed treatment campus, of which these girls will be able to come for a year-long intensive intervention. And then our plan is that they would reintegrate back into the communities wherever it is that they've come from. So we're building, that's why we want to partner and we work with organizations all over the country, because we get called all the time for girls that are actually in Hawaii who need to be sent back to other places or vice versa. And so building that collaboration, building that response is key to this work and being successful. And this is, I think, my last closing comment is this, that exploitation thrives in secrecy and shame. And the more connected we are in raising in the level of conversation, the greater our impact is going to be in decreasing the stigma around this issue across all demographics and socioeconomic sectors. We have to raise the level of this conversation. And the reality is now, no one in here can say that they didn't know that it happened. So I'm going to introduce to you our amazing team from Awaken here in Reno, and I'm going to let them share with you what's happening locally and what they're in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here and for taking time out of your Mondays to get educated. I love what was just said, that exploitation thrives in secrecy and shame, because that's absolutely what we see. I can't tell you how many of the girls' stories that I hear that they thought nobody saw them. And if nobody sees them, there's no one to help. And so I can tell you how powerful it is when our girls actually find out that the community shows up for them, that they want to get involved, that they're starting to have eyes to see them, that we get to bring light to that darkness. And so every time that we have an event, I know they get excited because community's shifting. And like Nick said, that is the key, is that when we become a community that says no more, the game is over. And I love that. My name is Jen, in case I didn't introduce myself. Am I echoey or just to me? Okay, well, hope it's okay. I'm with Awaken. I'm one of the co-founders, and we brought a whole team here. And essentially, Awaken started about 11 years ago. About 2011, we got our 501c3, so almost, Melissa and I, 10 years have been doing this work. And it started really small. We started with just therapy. And from there, we realized how ineffective therapy is when we don't have anything else to provide. You saw the list of needs. The needs are great, and so we started with a professional network of who in the community was actually offering certain services, and they were able to get involved that way. Melissa and I would meet people all the time that wanted to get involved, and we had no idea how to plug them in. And then slowly people would come in because we needed nurses that had eyes to see the girls differently. We needed social workers now to start identifying kids in our community. Our community, actually, we started a model protocol for our state. And so every child now that goes on the run, when they come back, they go through a checklist. And if they flag either on the high-risk category or the confirmed category, they automatically make a referral. So in Reno, our numbers that are related to social services are really high, and I believe because they're starting to have eyes for the kids. And we're starting to partner with other agencies that also work with children. The medical field, yes, law enforcement, but the schools, counselors, nurses in the schools, they're starting to have eyes, even school police. Some of our best referrals at Awaken have been from school police. And they'll just call. One girl as young as 11 years old. School police called. She was at one of our local elementary schools. And he said, hey, this feels off. Will you come talk to one of our students? And so I got to go to the elementary school, and I got to meet with the girl in a private room and just share a little bit about who we are. And in doing that, we started a conversation of what she likes and what her hobbies are, and slowly we developed trust enough for her to actually open up that her aunt was the one who was exploiting her. It was familial. She was trafficking her for drugs. And so we see it as young as 11. But if nobody had eyes to see that 11-year-old, if we all believe that it didn't happen in our own community, and certainly not to 11 years old, we would have missed it. And so at Awaken, I've worked with as young as 11. That has been the youngest. But currently on our caseload, we have 12 years old, 13, 14, on up to in the 50s. Because age, it spans age. It doesn't matter. If you look for different vulnerabilities, I actually made a PowerPoint, but what's funny is I told Jessica I don't use it. So let me go. If you see the scope of the problem, think about Reno. We're really close to Reno, but here in Truckee is highlighted as well. Nevada is a destination, but so is Truckee, so is Lake Tahoe. And you see the different red areas where prostitution is thriving because we've actually created a market for it. And by doing that, we've said it's legal. So we assume it's safer. We assume the women there are consenting adults. But we miss out on the fact that they started at 11 years old when we didn't have eyes for them. And they turned 15, 16, 17. And at 17 and 364 days, we consider them as children, as victims. But the day they turn 18, it shifts in our minds that now they're consenting adults. They're choosing it. They just like sex. All the reasons we give to validate what we're still continuing to do to them. And I say we because it's all of us when we turn a blind eye. It's all of us when we fail to actually provide supportive services that they need. And so as a community, we get to shift that. Hopefully, this study was done by Creighton University, and they scraped the ads on Backpage, the same website, and what they found is Nevada has the highest commercial sex market, that we're actually double the next highest state. I think I have that. And it's because with our events, with legalizing it, but what you see with it was all illegal ads, but when we legalize it, since we do create that market, the illegal also increases. And people just assume, oh, it's not happening illegally here because it's legal. But that's not true. You saw the map. It's technically not legal in Truckee. It's not legal in Reno or Tahoe, but it happens, and it's red in those areas. And so what we see too, if you look at the ads, that if you read different taglines, the buyers actually want younger. They want sexy. They want what is technically a hot topic right now. And so the younger, the better. And they have code words and slang. And Chantel's going to talk about social media and how that plays into it. But they have different emojis that they even use to say how young they are or to say what they're willing to provide. And so it's gone younger and more underground. One thing at Awaken, our mission, just to go back a little bit, is to increase awareness and education around commercial sexual exploitation. And that's because if we don't know, we can't do anything about it. And so we started off kind of going from church to church, community to community, and really just tapping into what was in store there. How can we encourage people? What did God want for that community? And so through that, we got to watch him stir hearts. Like I said, how we started with just a therapy, it grew. And so one of our main goals was always to provide housing and restoration for the women and the girls that we work with. And in January, we opened our first restorative home, which is amazing. You want to clap for that? That's really exciting. I get excited. This is something we prayed about for years and years, and we thought at the beginning that the safe house was the answer, but it's actually a safe city. And so after 7 years of praying into that, we finally opened our first home because I believe we're becoming a safer city. And it's time to now be able to house them. And it's a 2-year transitional home that the girls get to live in, and they get to work and go to school and start pursuing dreams of their own. And so that's I would say one of the most excited aspects of what we do at Awaken. Also our prevention work. I'll go into a little bit of our services. Prevention's at the top because we honestly believe if we can raise up the next generation to know their worth, to know their value, they're less likely to fall victimized, to fall to the tactics that the traffickers use of relationship, of providing, of the debt, I'm going to buy you a new pair of jeans. Think about the survival sex. When kids run, if they are not met quickly, they might just go back. A story was floating through my head as Jessica was speaking, and it was of a 14-year-old that was essentially dropped off at our drop-in center. We have a drop-in center that's located in the heart of where prostitution and trafficking happen. And essentially this girl was being abused by her cousin. She was living with her grandma, and her cousin would come over and abuse her at night, and so she ran away, and she was staying at a friend's house. Well, his uncle dropped her off at Awaken and just dropped her off in the alley that we're at. And it wasn't minutes later that she was dropped off there, because she didn't walk right in, that a trafficker from across the street that we know that's staying in the local motel had walked over and had already approached her and had asked her if she had a place to stay. Thankfully, at that exact same time, one of our staff members was walking to her car and saw the man and the young girl talking to each other, and it looked off. And so she went and approached and asked if she was okay, and the girl said no, and so we brought her in and we got to hear her story. And that's when we got to intervene and actually get her help. But I can't imagine what her story would have ended like if one of our staff members hadn't intercepted that conversation, because he was so primed to be on the lookout for someone young who looked out of place, who looked like she didn't have anywhere that she was going or knew who she was going to talk to. And so they're primed to see that, and not just on 4th Street where the heart of prostitution takes place, but at the bus stations, at the mall, at schools. Because if we think traffickers aren't hanging out at schools where vulnerable kids are, then we're naive again. Traffickers are going to be hanging out where your kids hang out. And I would say social media is going to be the #1 place right now, which Chantel will hit on in a little bit. But I believe truly if we can hit the prevention as well as the buyers, we could actually see this end in our time. Ultimately, for us, city transformation is the biggest goal, because we all believe that our community can be the safest city, that girls can actually hear that they're going to be trafficked to Nevada. We have a ton of events, and so girls are trafficked here every single day of the year, and they could actually hear, hey, I'm so glad I'm going to Reno because I know there's help there. I'm glad that I'm going to Truckee or Tahoe because I hear there's people who really care there, and we can actually be that for them, and I believe that we're becoming that as well. And then restoration is our final pillar that we call it, and really just going after the heart of what the women need, who's affected, and what does that look like. And so it's the whole span between, we will work with young girls who are just high risk, who are being flagged for multiple runaways, older sexual partners, drugs, gang affiliation, whatever that looks like, the high risk category for us for youth we will also work with and provide different services. But once they are confirmed, then we work with the minors and the adults semi-separately. Some of the groups overlap, but for the most part, and if it's ever therapeutic, we do separate the two. And we offer mentorship, therapy, group and individual counseling. We offer case management, talking about getting the schools involved. We meet monthly with the kids, with their entire team, and so social workers, school counselors, different school liaisons. I can tell you, going back to school is really hard for our girls. And we just went back this month, and so you're starting to see the girls that actually really like school and want to stay put, but it's only been a week and a half. And so where it's motivation right now not to run because they're liking school, what happens when their first exam happens? And they maybe they didn't study correctly, and so they fail their exam, or they're not able to do their homework. And kids start to get word of what happened over summer, and all of a sudden the rumors are going and the names that they're being called. And school becomes a really unsafe place for a lot of our girls, and so they run back to the streets. Because our traffickers there saying, I will always accept you. You're always welcome here. I know what you've done, and it doesn't matter. You belong here. And so if we don't get the schools on board as well, I would say that's one of the biggest trigger points for our girls. As well as then, we need homes. We need more homes for the girls that we work with specifically. Like I said, we opened a home, but it is for 18 and older. But the young girls are going right back into group homes or foster care or families that they actually ran from in the first place. And so if we can't then provide a safe place for them to go back, it's another reason why they run. And so it's going to take a whole community response to actually solve this issue. And so one way that you guys can get involved, obviously the mentorship component. I would say at Awaken, our mentors are our favorite people in the world. They're all ages. The oldest is 86 years old, and she loves unconditionally. She opens up her home. She loves the girls to come over and share meals with them. She'll run errands with them. And so that's one area of involvement that you guys can get involved in. We also have a sign-up sheet up there, and so if you guys are interested in receiving our newsletter or getting involved, if there is something that you have to offer, we probably have a need for that. And so we would love for you guys to get involved. You guys feeling okay? I've seen a lot of faces just stare at me. Cool. Well, we're going to move on.
So one of the things that I've learned in the amount of time I've worked with these guys is not to wear mascara on the bottom. So if you ever attend something else like this, don't wear mascara on the bottom. My name is Chantel Brewer. I am from Reno. I work and live with my kids and my husband in Reno. I'm a career educator. I've worked for Washoe County. I've worked for state charter schools. I've been an educator in Clark County, where I was raised in the school system, that's where I was first introduced to all of this as a student. And because of my background, I kind of became a peer advocate, and that's just my feisty nature. That's who I have become. I knew Jesus from the time I was 7. He called me super early. And so I love that not just that Molly shared her story, but that each of you are willing to be here to hear it. I love that you guys are part of a community. I love your point of that it takes every member in the community. I love that list that you shared of the people that can be involved. And one of the things that from the time I was so young that is also very clear to me is how influential peers can be. And I think somebody over here is an educator, and I think, and maybe more of you, but every one of you is in the community. And if these women are adults and being exploited, they're your peers. And if you have children, you have the opportunity to raise kids in a way that, in an age-appropriate way, that they know that this is an issue. My daughter gave a what for to her teacher, who turned off a video very similar to this one, but she stopped it right before it talked about the whole thing that was happening was trafficking. It was internet safety. That's what they were talking about. And I love that, and I'll talk about that briefly in just a minute to wrap up. But my 14-year-old can go into her middle school and she can say, that's trafficking. That's my mom works to put a stop to that. And she stood up and she taught her teacher something. And that's just because, as an educator, any of you who are around children, you guys can be standing outside of a 7-Eleven and understand the amount of peer pressure if you're watching two youth standing next to each other. The peer pressure is crazy. And part of what we get to do as a church is follow Jesus, right? He went to the kids. He pulled the kids in. And this is definitely something that is, it transcends all age groups and a lot of different demographics. But because my job is prevention, my job is to go into the schools, my job is to train educators of what to be aware of, to work in the community and say, every single one of you have the opportunity to be a part of this awareness. Whether you are at a party with people and they say, they mention it, if they mention something in the news, you're talking about Epstein, you know better now. And the more that you choose to learn, the better prepared you are. The more you read about it, the more prepared you are to say, we don't call them underage women. That's not something. You know, I mean, maybe you won't be the cool person at the party after you say that, but, you know, you're a Christian, so welcome to it. You know, I mean, that's just... Jesus wasn't popular, I promise you. It was not super popular. Not for the reasons that people want to be popular. But sometimes it just takes saying it like it is. It just takes you saying, enough is enough. Molly's story shows us there were so many people, so many points in her story where somebody could have said, the CPS worker could have said, this is beyond just an unstable home. Something else needs to happen here. We need better services here. That police officer could have chosen not to throw his hands up and say, there's nothing I can do here, because he's a man, he's a human, he's a community member, and then he's a police officer. And this is a girl that needed protecting. Her friend, if her friend would have been aware of this as an issue, her friend could have said, it's not just someone sleeping in the park. This is someone who needs help. And teaching that little girl, Haley, you keep telling people, you keep speaking up for your friend until someone listens to you, until someone agrees to do something. Those are the kind of things that we can do in our churches, in our schools, in our work, in our parties, wherever we are living our life in our community. Those are the sort of changes that we can, as a community, bring. And then I want to touch on the internet safety and the internet factor. We just live in a day and age where that technology is just at our fingertips. And one of the number one ways that exploitation is happening, and this does not just include human trafficking. Sometimes people want to exploit our kids just to have their pictures. They will never have to come in contact with them, but they have this power over these kids because these kids, you know, we go back to this brain, this is not developed. But they really think that they are in a solid relationship with this kid because they've seen his picture when he could be this creepy dude. They have no idea that he's 50 and he stole all those pictures off of someone else's Instagram. And so these girls think that they're genuinely in a relationship online with these predators. And so then they, you know, someday we're going to meet, I just can't right now. And it can take a lot of different pathways. But what happens is because they don't have all of their reasoner yet, they agree to send a photo that includes their face, and then there's so much shame. And that's the other thing that we need to be teaching our own children. There's no point too far where I'm going to say, sorry, that's enough, I don't love you anymore. Or I can't walk with you anymore as your mama because that was just the one thing too far. And I know that sounds crazy, but we actually have to say those words. You have to say that to the kids that are in your life. You have to say that to the young adults, the college students who are in your life. There's no line. There is no line. If we are really following Jesus, there's no line. And that's great. That's the grace, right? That's that mercy and grace. With internet, as a community, we can be setting up boundaries. We can be having conversations with our kids because that is, I don't know the statistic, I don't remember it, but the amount of exploitation that's happening through pornography online, we saw what that leads to. The amount of exploitation that happens through Instagram, through Snapchat, through there's an app on that kids can get called Calculator, and it genuinely looks like a calculator until you push a series password, and it's a whole secret stash of photos. It's a whole secret stash of who's coming up with this garbage. I want to meet that guy and help him out, right? It's ending the demand. But I just think, man, he's brilliant. Let's put it to better use, right? I mean, I just let me be his teacher for 1 year. That's how I feel sometimes. Just 1 year. But there are things that we can do. We can set our own phones down and have a face-to-face conversation while we're standing in the grocery store line around a kid and ask that question. How are you? They probably won't know how to answer you yet because they don't have face-to-face conversations with people. That's old school. But you can set that new standard. You can wait until they actually answer you before moving on. And if they don't answer you, ask them again. They'll think you're weird and awkward, but they'll just be like, dude, this guy in line, he wouldn't stop asking me, how are you doing, until I actually answered him. They love talking about adults and making fun of them. So just choose to be the one that's going to be that guy. I'm very right. I mean, I have 5 teenagers, so I actually 1 adult, but I super don't. So those tiny little cultural changes are things that we, wherever you're at in your community, those are definitely things that you guys can be doing. But that biggest piece because I am such a fan of prevention, this has to be bookended with all the services that they've talked about. But that it has to be bookended with that prevention piece. And that's so simple. It's deciding to leave these pews, leave these chairs, and go out there and be this same person that you are in here out there. Going out and having conversations with people and changing. You know, we don't think telling pimp jokes is funny. That can't be funny, and we stand for what we are saying that we stand for. We can't have that clash of culture. So those are just small things that you can do. And then with Molly's story, think about all those moments. Haley's grandmother, she's a grandmother, but she could have said, there's a little girl sleeping in the park and I don't want her, instead of saying, I don't want you near my kid, which, I mean, in her mind, she probably thought she was doing what was right, but maybe she was really setting a terrible example for her granddaughter. Sorry, Haley's grandma, if you're in this room. I'm not sorry, we'll talk later. But I'm just kidding, that was not a threat. I'm an advocate. But if you see a situation like that, be that nosy neighbor. Be willing to be so different, to be so counterculture, that kids see you and say, that's my person. That's the person I can come in, I can say anything to, because they've already said there's no line.